All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our 10th anniversary live stream. My name is Yuan Yuan, and I am the product manager at Hopscotch. And we have Tracy with us here today.
Yep. Sorry. Hey everyone. Really nice to have you all here with us today. I'm Tracy and I'm currently a developer at Hopscotch. But yeah, mainly just both of us hosting today.
Awesome. So for today's live stream, we've prepared a number of exciting things for you. We've answered some questions. And the first thing we will do is, let's see if my slide works. We will take a trip down memory lane. We've been around for 10 years, and that is a long time. And that means we've gone through a lot of changes with our app. And, some of you have been here longer than the others. So but some people haven't. So we're actually going to show you a little demo of how Hopscotch used to look like, which I think will be super exciting.
Yeah. Union and I haven't been here for the whole 10 years, obviously, but I was here as a user around 1 year after Hopscotch was released in the App Store. So I kind of remember most of the 10 years. So for Hopscotch 1.0, Hopscotch was released in April 2013 on the App Store, and Hopscotch 1.0 lasted until about for 1 year. And this is what the editor used to look like. So as you can see, the blocks are on the left-hand side, and on the top, you can see there's a list of objects that where you can choose which object, for the code you currently look which object object's code you're currently looking at. And then you can see there's drop downs where you can change the when. And yeah, you can see the blocks, currently repeat times and leave a trail are containers in the app, but here you can see they're more C-shaped. And it's
I think it looks really funny because it's so squarey and it has a lot of corners. And that is something that we actually don't have much anymore. Don't quote me on that, but I just, from on top of my head, I feel like we've added a lot more rounded corners to the buttons that we have in the app.
Yeah. It's definitely around that time. I think when Hopscotch was released, Scratch was around when Hopscotch was being worked on, Scratch was around 1.0, so it wasn't available widely on the web yet. But you can see it's kind of a similar to Scratch.
Especially with the repeat blocks that we have. It would nest the little blocks inside.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of for 1.0, and I guess for 2.0 we can show you a demo of it. So Hopscotch 2.0 came around 2014, April 2014, and I'll just share my screen so we can see. And so this is when the stage was added, and here you can see you can drag out the objects from this this menu, and you can add rules. So if I add, say, when character is tapped, I can do things like make it jump and make it spin. And here you can see the blocks are also on the left side. And if you've ever used the web editor, you can probably also see some similarities here, because Ethan, or Awesome E, who worked on the web editor, took some inspiration from Hopscotch 2.0. And another thing is, abilities were something new that was added in Hopscotch 2.0, and that just lets people reuse code a lot more easily. So you can see it's pretty similar to how it is now.
It's very interesting because this entire area where you can add code in only contains one when's rule, right? As opposed to all of them where we have now. So that's also a difference.
Yeah. And another difference is this version of Hopscotch also needs to have like this preview window up here where if I press play, it would preview the code in the current rule. And that we don't have that in the current app, but I think it was like due to some like technical challenges because this version of Hopscotch and Hopscotch 1.0 was only available on iPad. So the way that projects were played were a bit different. Projects also couldn't be played in the web browser yet. I'm not quite sure when. I think that was like around like when Hopscotch began to be available on iPhones. But yeah, we'll go into that a bit later.
But it's really cool that you can see the preview here because I imagine in certain situations for you to, if you ever have to figure out a number for where to position the object, probably be much easier to have this preview instead of having to press play and then go back and forth between your code, which was one of the frustrations that I hear a lot from Hopscotchers. And I actually got a chance to observe people coding a couple of months ago, and there was a user who was trying to code trail art, and they had to very quickly, like I cannot imagine how their finger were going, but it was a lot of back and forth, play, go back, change the number, play, go back, change the number. So this feature was definitely really helpful to have.
Yeah, I definitely found it very useful for trail art as well. And yeah, as you can see, most of the blocks are pretty similar, except that currently we have more blocks. Yeah, clones were something new that was added in this version as well. And yeah, I remember the 1.0 didn't have oops, sorry, I'm just gonna see if someone needs to be admitted, but Hopscotch 1.0 didn't have check once if before as well. But yeah, I'll just show you what the math editor used to look like. So the list of blocks math operators were under here. And here's where you can enter like numbers. The help button was like this, the help text was available in this question mark here. And if I just go back, you can see what the variables used to look like. So they weren't self variables yet, but here, like if you had more objects, you could also go through and see the variables that were available. And yeah, I guess that's kind of touching on some of the main points in this like window here. I'll show you what it looks like when you add another rule as well. So, or I could do another one.
Because the rules now appears on the side. So I imagine if you have a bunch of them, you'll quickly go through the top of the screen, which will be annoying.
Yeah. So if I add more rules, you can see that they it's a bit different to how it works currently. So they you can kind of see a list of them here. But if there are a lot of them, then yeah, it will just be a window that it will be something that you can scroll through. I guess I'll just add a few more to see so you can see.
And it's also very interesting how it appears more drafty. I'm not sure if that's a word, but
yeah.
it looks a lot more like a draft for the characters that you added to the stage. But then when you play it, it will actually show the final result, which will be the more polished version, which I thought is a very good indication for where your workspace is and where the final product is.
Yeah, definitely. I like the look of these characters as well. But I think it probably meant that whenever like a new character had to be added, like there would have to be a design for the draft version on the stage, and then also the one that looks what it looks like when you play the project. But yeah, I guess we can also touch on Hopscotch 3.0.
Yep, and let's take it to what we have now then.
Is it okay if we just go back to the slide quickly so I can change?
Yes, you can just stop the sharing. Yep.
Okay.
So, I mean, in 3.0 is the version that we're currently on. And even though it seems like we fast forward a lot, 3.0 itself has many different versions and upgrades throughout the way. You know, it's definitely did not look like how 3.0 first came out for sure. So
Yeah. I'll just share my screen. And yeah, I guess one of the things with Hopscotch 3.0 is I guess we have the scenes, and the object keyboard is now on the bottom. And the Hopscotch 3.0 came out around, I think it was like 2016. The aim with Hopscotch 3.0 was for Hopscotch to also work on the iPhone so that when you're editing projects like the layout, it works on both, iPad and iPhone. And so with the keyboard being on the bottom, because with the previous layout, like if you were to put that on iPhone, it would be like
I imagine that would be pretty tough because iPhones are narrower. So
yeah. So and here I guess a difference between this and 2.0 is that you can see multiple rules at once. So that just makes it easier to see your code. And the other thing is there are custom rules in Hopscotch 3.0 because you can group multiple rules within a custom rule. And sorry, I'll just let in. And yeah, I guess the other thing is you can also see the code for all objects at once if you have multiple objects. And yeah, I guess that's touching on some of the with the editor of 3.0. And then there's also the keyboard, the math keyboard and variables keyboard.
yeah, something I think was very obvious was like I mentioned before, now I can confirm is that there's more rounded corners. And I think it's probably also a trend in how the design have evolved for different apps. You know, it's like makes it, I want to say makes it look a lot less aggressive when you added the corners in the buttons. And having it in the bottom definitely helped. But also before, when we had it in the panel, you couldn't have as much block as if you have now in the bottom, because it's a wider keyboard sort of, and you can see a lot of blocks at the same time. But before, you have to scroll up and down, and then I don't know if I remember correctly, but it was one block at a time nested on top of each other. So it's probably, you know, given how much blocks that we've added, it would have probably been pretty hard to find the blocks that you need.
Yeah. And yeah, definitely you fit a lot more blocks on the screen right now. And I think one of the things that I remembered with Hopscotch 2.0 was the addition of video tutorials. So you could have a little window, and it's also in Hopscotch 3.0, to see the like watch along with the video tutorials and code. I think that's kind of the main things with Hopscotch 3.0. There have been a lot, and aside from just all the blocks as well. But yeah, this kind of a brief overview of how Hopscotch has evolved over the years.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy, so much for the demo. And something that Hopscotchers have always wondered is, what are Hopscotch team's favorite features? And we will answer that today. Tracy and I have made our own picks. I hope the answers are not too boring for you, but they're definitely genuine. So my pick is a relatively recent development, which is the scenes in Hopscotch. I mean, it has a personal significance to me because this is one of the big projects that I worked on, and we work really hard on the designs to make this happen. And secondly, this is a very, I feel like this is a very revolutionary change in Hopscotch, in how people understand how projects are made. And it definitely explains how the hierarchy of code works in Hopscotch. So previously, you would start a project, and actually you can still access that by turning your iPad to classic mode. Previously, when you start a project, you would directly enter the stage, and the scenes would be a beta feature that's only available through advanced mode. So it's something you have to turn on, and not a lot of people know about it. But as you can tell, it will be very confusing for you to just start saying, okay, here's scenes and you can use it now. Because the first question will be, what is the scene feature, right? And it sort of feels abstract to explain. But now that we've moved it so that when you start a draft, you will always start with the scenes menu over here. It makes it clear that in a project, you can have many different scenes, and then each scene can have many objects, and each object can have the rules and blocks that will run the code, right? And then you go from top to bottom, and that's sort of how Hopscotch works. And I just think this is the more intuitive way for people to understand how projects are made in Hopscotch, and how different features or different parts of the draft sort of relate to each other, right? There's this sort of like you go down the level, and I think it definitely made me have a much easier time to play projects or even create projects with multiple scenes, which is something I always do, because for me to create announcements in Hopscotch, a lot of times I will have to use the change scene block to change to different scenes. Then I can just add the pictures instead of having me to make a variable and then make sure certain pictures show up when the variable is equal to a certain value. So I definitely think it's more beginner friendly, and it's a very meaningful change as well.
Yeah.
And what about you, Tracy? What is your pick?
Yeah, I would always have to go with new blocks in the Hopscotch editor. I guess being having used Hopscotch myself, like as a user, like before I joined the team, I'm always excited about new blocks. And also having being able to work on adding some blocks myself, like during the dev time here. And some recent blocks that I added were set background, the new trail blocks. These are in advanced mode, but
the set background block was the first block you've made in Hopscotch, right?
Oh yeah. That was when I started doing dev work at Hopscotch, and just to like get a bit more familiar with like the code base. Yeah, that was like a kind of straight, like in terms of just something to start working on. Yeah, that was the first block I added. And I guess with in terms of for users, like set trail opacity and set trail cap have been something that people have asked for quite a while. And then with set background, I remember you've kind of mentioned with in terms of when you like users often start with Hopscotch, the first thing they want to do is just after they have like a project with a couple of objects, like first thing you want to do is change the background color. And with the leaf trail block, if you've used Hopscotch for a while, like it's you kind of know like you need to leave a trail and then make the width like really big, and then like move forward one. But with set background, it just kind of makes it easier and more intuitive if you're a new user.
But do you, I guess, I don't want to put you on spot right now, but do you have sort of like a favorite block? I certainly have one. A block that I always use is set invisibility. And the reason why I mention it is because before I discover scenes, that's how I would change what appears on screen. I would just make everything go invisible. And when I first discovered how to do that, I was very proud of myself. I mean, I've had computer science background, but figuring out which code does what is a different ball game. I did not anticipate it. Actually took me a while to really get into Hopscotch coding. And I I mean, I'm always blown away by the projects people can make with all the blocks we have, because certainly there will be times where I cannot even understand how certain code were written in Hopscotch. So, but that was a block that sort of started my Hopscotch journey. So I've always kind of liked that set invisibility block.
Yeah. Definitely. So invisibility is a really, really handy block. I feel like it's really hard to pick a single block. I guess like one of the ones that I've been using a lot more recently, like since it was added, was probably broadcast message. And just to go over, broadcast message lets you basically send out an event. Like you can do broadcast message like enemy destroyed, and you can have other objects respond to that event. And you can do things like make a score go up or like play a sound effect. And I think it just really helps to make your code more flexible. And it's basically like making custom events almost, or like you're kind of in custom wins. But yeah, that's probably one of my favorite ones in terms of how it changed. Like it changes how I code in Hopscotch.
Yep. And I do have a fun fact for people who is watching this live stream. So it's not a question that a lot of people are curious about is what is the most used block in Hopscotch? I did take a look at it, and I guess surprisingly and unsurprisingly, it's when game starts. It's the rule that sort of, well, it's the rule that plays when game starts. I have my suspicions. I think it's probably because it's one of the first blocks that you can add in Hopscotch, right? As soon as you open an object, that it appears right there, right after custom blocks. But I also think for most of our games, we probably use this rule one way or another, because there's always things that we want to set up, variables that we want to set up in the beginning of the game. But yeah, that is statistically the most used blocks on average by people in Hopscotch when game starts.
Yeah, I guess it definitely makes sense. And yeah, I think it doesn't surprise me to find out, but yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. All right. So for our next part, we have Hopscotchers questions. So earlier this month, we opened a topic on the Hopscotch forum that asks people if they have any questions that they're curious about or they want answers from us. And we went through and picked out some of the questions to share the answers. The first questions we have sort of like from two different people, but I thought they sort of go into the same theme, so I grouped them together. So why is Hopscotch called Hopscotch in the first place? And if the team had never thought of the name Hopscotch, what would the name of the app be now?
Yeah, so I guess as I mentioned, like Yuan and I weren't there for the founding of Hopscotch, but we did talk to our co-founders, who are Jocelyn and Samantha, to get an insight on this. So for the first one, why is Hopscotch called Hopscotch? I guess in terms of the name itself, like you probably, if you've seen some of the loading screens in Hopscotch, there's one that kind of touches on this. But with the chalk game Hopscotch, like you can play it on the street pavements. Just to briefly go over that game, you can draw like a set of squares on the pavement, numbered squares, and you can hop on them in order. And so with that game, like before you can play that game, you have to make it first. You have to draw it on the pavement. And with similarly, in games that like you want to play on Hopscotch, either like you have to make them or someone else made them first before you can play it. And I guess it kind of just touches on the theme of letting kids have agency over what they use and like play with every day. Like, because compared to apps, like most of the apps on the App Store, like you can't see how they work. You can't really easily make one of them yourself. But with Hopscotch, it's really about like putting the agency like in like centering it with the kids. Yeah, so that's just kind of why Hopscotch is called Hopscotch.
Yeah, and I sort of like the analogy too, because in the game you usually number it for where you will go next. And in Hopscotch, when you add the blocks, it starts from the top and it sort of execute the code one after another. So it's sort of is how both are run similarly too. Now with the second question for what Hopscotch's name would have been, it's a surprise story that we also recently found out, is that Hopscotch was almost going to be called Emma at one point. And that is because when Hopscotch was first made, there was another programming tool called Alice that was very popular, sort of revolutionized how coding was taught and learned in the world. So and the co-founders really liked the idea of naming Hopscotch after a girl because, at that time and still today, computer science is such a male-dominated field and then both of our co-founders are women, so they wanted to name it Emma. At that time, there was actually a third co-founder, and he was dating a girl whose name was Emma. So he strongly disagreed with putting the name Emma to use for the app. So that sort of just went away. And, they wanted to find something with 2 syllables. So look through a bunch of names and Hopscotch sort of just came along and it works, it's fun. And I think it sort of embodied what we do here very well. So I'm glad we ended up with the name, but a very fun story.
Yeah, I totally didn't anticipate that one as well. Yeah, I think on another note, I don't know if some of you might seen, but Hopscotch had an earlier app like that came out before Hopscotch, called Daisy the Dinosaur. But yeah, that's also I think named like after a girl's name.
Yeah. Okay, for our next question, what is the developmental process of creating a new block? Now, this is a very good question because it's very complicated and it's something that we deal with every day at our work. But sort of the developmental process of creating a new block can be broken down to 5 steps. The first one is to find an idea. Where do we find the idea? A lot of times you will leave a comment or send us an email on the forum or send us an email about any feature requests that you have. We might not be able to get to all of them at once, but we definitely note them down and keep it somewhere so that we can refer back when we are ready to make a new release. So that's mainly where we get our ideas from, or sometimes we look at our app and say, okay, like what features do we need? What would help people to use Hopscotch better? And those are the main ways. And of course, there's always exceptions, but these are the main ways where we gather our ideas from. And then we go to step 2, which is we have to justify which ideas that we picked, right? We have to make sure that we have our goals, we have our motivations for making this new block, right? Why would we want to make the set trail block? No, the set trail cap block before we make set background. I mean, like what Tracy mentioned before, set background is something that a lot of people can benefit from. And whereas set trail cap is a little more advanced, like you first have to understand how trail art works in Hopscotch. Then you will go into, figuring out what the cap is and then how to code it. So we look at a number of factors from how many people can benefit from using this block, what kind of impact it can bring to our app, and just other goals that we have. And once we have all of those together, we are ready for step 3, which is the design of the block. Now, this is sort of the fun and the complicated part because it's not just about how the block works, even though that's a very big part of it. There's other parts that can just complicate the process a little bit. So for example, you have to figure out how to name the block. And Tracy can share a little more about this, because we, like, even for the recent blocks we made, we've changed the names a couple of times.
Yeah. With for example, with set trail cap, some of the names that we thought of were set brush and set line cap. And I think we found that with set brush, like, it didn't quite communicate like what the block was, because it's more about the ends of the lines rather than like the shape of like the whole line itself. And with set trail opacity, at one point I think we considered like set transparency, but then we thought that it would just sorry, I just had to let someone in. We thought it might be confusing with set invisibility, because it kind of, set transparency would kind of communicate that it sets the transparency of the whole object itself rather than just the trail. And with so yeah, we also considered like set trail transparency, but that was a bit too long, so we ended up with
It's just too long to fit,
yeah.
which also goes into another part of design, right? If your name is too long, then the blocks will not fit. And where does the block go? Does it go to looks and sound? Does it goes to the trail art section? Does it go to control flow? And for some blocks, it's more obvious than the other ones. But for example, when I first ever for the first ever time that I saw broadcast message, I was very confused why it was in control flow, because looking at the name, I actually assumed that when you use the block, it would broadcast a message on the screen to tell the user what's happening. So I've always wondered why it doesn't go under looks and sound, but it actually has a lot to do with its functionality of being able to pass a message across different objects in your game.
Yeah.
So,
it's more about the control like flow, like because you control what code will currently run, like will run afterwards.
yeah.
But yeah, definitely, yeah.
And then once you sort of get I would say the outside, the look of the block together, right? The name, how it works. I guess that's sort of on the inside. Another big part is would it have parameters? How many parameters will we have, and what type of parameters, right? Like, do we put text? Do we put numbers? Or do we put special types? Or do we make a completely new one? So those are all the ones that we have to consider.
Yeah, and I can talk about some of those for example, with the change scene and set trail cap. So I guess with set trail cap, if you've used the block, like, or like in the previous screenshot, you would have seen that it has like a custom parameter type, like, which is just visually displaying what the trail end would look like. And so yeah, we had a new one with that because I guess it would just a new parameter type for that, because it just kind of communicates it better to the user to see it visually rather than like seeing a text like round, square, or so on. And with the update to change scene, so previously the change scene block used to be just change scene to text, and whatever you put in the text, like if there was a scene with that name, it would change to that scene. And one of the problems like existing problems was that when people renamed a scene, basically they would have to go back and change all the change scene blocks and change the value to the
That would be such a hassle. I will not look forward to do that.
Yeah. And so we added a new parameter type, which is like the scene bubble. And then so when you rename a scene, that bubble will automatically change like its name to be the one of the new name. And but it'll still like point to the same scene basically. But yeah, the change scene block also supports like numbers and still supports text. So if you put in a number, it'll change to that like number, that like the scene that's in that position in the scenes list. Yeah, starting from 0. And but yeah, that kind of just that change to the parameter type just makes it a bit more flexible for what you want to do with it.
Yeah. And after all that is decided, we also have to write a help text that explains how the block works. But say we wrap all of the stage 3 together. Then we have stage 4, which is dev work. So it's coding the block. And then step 5, which is testing and debugging. And I put those 2 steps sort of together because it's not a one-way ticket. It's sort of like you make a block, you test it. Oh, there's a bug. And then you go back, recode the thing, and then you go back. And sometimes after we code it and test it, we realize that's not the block we wanted. We have to actually go all the way back to redesigning the block, changing the name or even changing how the block works. So it's not as linear as we imagined, or you have imagined, or everyone has imagined.
Yeah. And I can talk a little bit about like the dev side. So when we add a new block, we have to make it work in the editor. Like we add it to the editor and then in the player. So for the editor, that's just making it appear in the right spot on the keyboard. And when you add it, like it has the right parameter types, and making any new parameter types if we need to. And for making it work in the player. So that's when you play the project, making sure it works on both iOS and on the web browser. It's the same player, but like it's the same code base to play on both. But yeah, that's just kind of touching on what the dev work is for adding a new block.
And then I guess after all 5 steps are done, then we would happily go to, I guess, the final thing, which is the release, and then everyone gets to download it. So that's sort of how the overview of the developmental process for creating a new block will look like. And this doesn't just go to the block. Usually when you see a new feature, anything that has a change in Hopscotch, even with bugs that we pick out to fix, it sort of go through the same process of these 5 steps, right? Pick out which one to do, figure out the design, what do we want to do with it, and then actually making the change, and then testing, and then release. So, but a very good question. Now, let's see. Next one, we have, has there been a feature that you have wanted to add to Hopscotch, but could not due to limitations with older devices, or would take too much time, or would require a bunch of work, or any other reason? So that was a long sentence. But this is definitely something that we also deal with every day.
Yeah, there's probably like way too many like to go through, and I guess like some other features like we'd still like to do down the track. But I guess in terms of an existing one that's been like quite difficult is adding Hopscotch to multiple platforms. And I know like it's changed with like the web editor, but just to kind of go through some of the challenges with that, I guess. Yeah, there's just one of the main considerations is just the design. So even as you saw when Hopscotch went from being available on just iPads to like then being available on iPhones as well, that required like some significant design considerations, like in terms of making the editor fit horizontally on the iPad and then vertically on the iPhone. They went with a design that could kind of work on both. And with also like I think another consideration is like some system requirements. So with Hopscotch, it's been currently on iOS, and the code base is like specific to iOS. So that was why it couldn't be added on Android and so on, like as an app. But yeah, I guess even with the web editor, another aspect is in terms of maintenance, so making sure that like there's also a lot of work involved with keeping like all of the platforms up to date. And yeah, I guess we are kind of a small team, so that's just kind of been another limitation. But yeah, I guess in terms of a feature, that a kind of general feature is that it would be nice to have Hopscotch available on more platforms.
Yeah, like, that is certainly something that we all wish for. But we're working on it, so sooner or later it will be true. And so I guess something else that people have requested a lot, and we also would love to do more is adding new characters to Hopscotch, right? I see a lot of emails. They're like, it's so easy. Why don't you just make a new character? Just add it to Hopscotch. We want new characters. And unfortunately, it's not as simple as import, boom, it's on the keyboard, right? I mean, if you think about what we talked about earlier, first you have to figure out what kind of character you want to add, and then you want to figure out how it will look like. We already have a array of characters in Hopscotch that have a certain style. So when we make new ones, we have to make sure the styles are consistent with what we've already had on our keyboard. And that takes a lot of time. And then after that, you have to decide where it goes to the keyboard. Actually, I think one of the big problems that we have is that now that we're having a lot of characters and we have special Halloween characters and winter characters, that sort of just takes up a whole lot of the keyboard. You have to take many scrolls to the right to the end of the list. Now, for those of you who have been here for a while, that's easy. But imagine someone new who's coming to Hopscotch, being able to find gorilla. Actually, that was one of the user tests I gave to people a lot, is that you have to use the character gorilla. And you will be surprised by how long it takes for people to find a gorilla on our keyboard. Takes more than, I think the longest one I've had is like the person just kept looking, didn't find gorilla, and got so frustrated that they actually didn't want to continue anymore. So I had to give them a hint, of course. But that is to say, you know, if we just keep adding characters, then where would it go? Like, would it be too overwhelming for people to look at? Like, if you walk into a restaurant, it's like one of my way of thinking about it. If you go into a restaurant and they hand you this giant menu with everything you could ever imagine to eat, it would take you a lot longer to decide what you want to eat. I mean, the pro is obvious. You can sort of have so many options to explore, but the con is also, you know, is there. It's that it sort of makes it a lot harder for you to stay focused and just have your meal, be full, and, you know, be happy. So that's the same thing with adding characters. And we actually have to go through a process for characters to be added in Hopscotch. As you can see, you can squeeze it very tiny and then enlarge it to a bigger picture, and they will stay sharp. And that is not a very, you know, it's not a simple like import can do. So we actually have to run some process through that. And today I actually have a surprise revelation for a character. So over the left side, we have the character Parrot, which is currently in use, and it's voted as one of the favorites of Hopscotch characters on the forum. It's not the favorite. The favorite is the bear, but it's one of the top. It's definitely the stars of Hopscotch characters. And when we were designing Parrots, I found this draft of what parrots could have looked like. So it's this little parrot walking instead of flying. And I mean, sort of feel intuitive why we picked the parrot flying instead, because it's like a bird. But this is just show you how the design of a character is not as straightforward as it could be. We make different versions. We have to pick out, and it takes a lot of time. And then you have to animate it too. You have to make sure it moves correctly. It shouldn't be too funny, but it should be funny enough that people will love it, right? So lots of stuff that goes into that.
Yeah. And I think with the characters on the keyboard, if we get the chance to figure out a redesign of how like assets will look like on the keyboard, I think that would be like a prerequisite before we add new characters. But yeah, if we add, there's
I mean something that I've always wanted to add is a search bar for blocks, right? Like, this is an idea our team has talked nonstop, and I see Andrew is also here, one of our developer in the team. It's something that we talk about a lot. when we have team meetings to decide where to go next. And you know, search bar for blocks, but you know, like a lot of other amazing features like scenes, like all these new blocks that we have took priority. Is not to say that we like this less, but you know, it's just unfortunately we do have a smaller team, so everything might just take a little longer. But I imagine if we have a better search bar for blocks, we might be able to just add more characters and blocks. But that would definitely take a long time until it's revealed. So all right, at this point we have reached the end of our live stream. I think we're right on time, which is what I like. Don't really have questions for Q&A, I think, but what you can do is you can leave us a comment on the Hopscotch forum or send us an email if you want. And this whole recording will be uploaded to YouTube so that you can rewatch it if you missed some parts of it, or if your friends are interested but couldn't make it. But yeah, thank you so much for coming to this live stream. We're so happy to see you here.
Yeah, really. Thanks a lot, everyone, for coming to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Hopscotch, and thanks a lot for everyone on the forum as well for bringing it up. And yeah, I do know the co-founders like just really like appreciated it as well. And yeah, I don't think I have anything else to mention except yeah, if you're subscribed.
End the recording.